I think there often when I work with people, I say, it's important to remember that, because we function a lot on autopilot, we can also get kind of stuck in states, building on your point. So, I usually say a stressed nervous system tends to seek out more stress. So we get kind of comfortable with the state of stress. And then to your point, we need moments where, if this is sort of high stress, we need moments where we come down to zero. And that takes time. We need to sort of recover. We need time in parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest. And then there will be another moment of pressure. But the key is that we can that we have this flexibility. We can be in sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. We can be in kind of activation, and we can be in rest. And I think what you see, I work quite a bit with heart rate variability with clients. Right. So you actually measure heart rate, and then you can see when the people are stressed or relaxed. And what you tend to see is that most of us are in a state of sort of mild to moderate stress most of the time. So, I think what sort of we could say that the nervous system almost becomes familiar with that and then tends to seek it out. So we're sort of this, maybe a healthy neutral point is down here, right? Not so much stress. Yes. But we become used to this as the neutral point. This is the baseline. Yes. And then even when people have moments where they could relax, right? Maybe you've got 30 minutes between meetings. And okay, what you could do is really you go for a walk, have a cup of tea, meditate, do these things that we know, have a nap. But what do people do if they've got 30 minutes between meetings? They quickly do some emails or they make some phone calls. They try to kind of squeeze things in. So, what we find is that we start to lose our ability to relax because we don't do it often enough. And being in a state of relaxation actually starts to feel uncomfortable to people. Up here in moderate stress feels comfortable. I feel productive. I'm getting things done. It's almost like I'm burning this kind of energy, right? Yes. So does that sound familiar in your work as well?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does, by all means. So sometimes we have this, we call it an upregulation. Biologists like to say an upregulation of basal functioning levels, let us say. So you kind of, and then you're here, but you think here is normal, here is home. But that's not what your organism thinks, because your organism has a working of its own. It has a mind of its own. And sometimes people who are striving to acquire certain life habits and anyways, trying to improve the way they treat themselves ultimately. And they don't understand. They don't understand that the organism, note, I'm jumping body. I'm specifically stressing organism. It takes its own time. So to bring it down, you have to let your organism do it. I mean, you need sleep. You need to sleep the number of hours your organism demands. It's not the time your work schedule tells you can sleep, kind of. Make sense?
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
So in a certain way, we have to be kind of patient with ourselves. Kind of, in Portuguese, we say acolhedor, when you receive something loving kindly. I don't get a word right now in English, but it's kind of something like a mother that embraces a child, something that's quite relieving. We have to have that kind of approach to ourselves, because our organism takes time. So you have to be patient and caring with yourself, cherishing maybe. Make sense?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, and that starts with self-awareness, right? Of being aware. How do I actually feel? Have I become accustomed to this level of stress and I'm sort of seeking it out? do I need a break? Am I getting enough sleep? Do we have the interoception, right? The kind of internal mindfulness, the ability to sense our internal sensations, that we know how we're feeling. And then, as you say, then the impulse and the desire actually to take care of ourselves. And, I wonder a little bit with, it's interesting to come out of lockdown where probably we all got even more familiar with quite high levels of stress or synthetic activation, right? So it's sort of interesting that now, as that probably starts to die down a bit as we go back to normal. Now there's ChatGPT, and then, I wonder if we're a little bit seeking out another threat, It's not to diminish, because obviously, there is a threat, right? But I wonder if there's a little bit of human beings we're seeking, something big again, that our nervous systems can go back to that familiar zone of stress, and concern.
And maybe something that is extremely stressful, which is harm avoidance. The harm avoidance Professor Dr. Cloninger talks about, which is seeing threat in anything that's, because something can be challenging, not necessarily threatening, but we tend to mix the two things together. We kind of confound them. And and I think we probably came out of the lockdown, the threatening lockdown, in an extreme defensive fashion. And maybe we didn't have enough time to get out of this defensive mode and kind of giving ourselves a fair chance to deal with the challenges of artificial intelligence. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah.
And well, it's we think about, when we talk about there's a lot of talk going on about the healthy aspect of getting back to nature. Nature walk. In Japan, there are some studies that point that walking between trees seems to be special.
Forest bathing.
Yeah, it seems to be. And I was surprised to see, because as I'm a physician, I always have a look for certain things. Surprisingly, some anti-fungi, some antimicrobial substances are let down by the trees. The trees kind of let it fall on the floor, on the forest floor, to avoid the proliferation of certain kinds of fungi. And these substances are healthy to us. Yeah, they're helpful.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to our immunity. So in Japan, they recommend people to walk in the forest, specifically in the forest, not just the garden, in the forest, be covered by vegetation. Now, I was imagining that there are other ways also. We can't always afford a promenade, but we can maybe afford coming back to our senses, coming back to ourselves, because our organism is, in its own merit, nature, isn't it? I mean, I'm wearing glasses here, but these eyes, they are 100% natural. I mean,
I believe you.
Yeah. So does that make any sense in your field of work, in your experience, this kind of coming back to having a glass of tea, paying a cup of tea, paying attention to myself, not taking myself for granted? Isn't that in its own sense, isn't it a way of getting back to nature in ourselves? Make any sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, and there's because there's 2 points to that, and they both relate a bit, also to the way that our brains function in terms of well, I think the first part is more an emotional reconnecting with ourselves, right? And I think there's a lot of, I certainly see in my coaching work, people often saying, I just want to come back to myself, or come back to my nature, to kind of realign with myself. And the sort of feeling that the more that we engage with technology, and the busier we are and the more complexity we're dealing with, we can sort of lose track of ourselves, or kind of be misaligned with who we are. So I think there's certainly something in that is quite important. And then in the way that we do that, I more and more now when I do leadership retreats, I really try to push to have them in nature, not in the office or not in a kind of, you know, conference center somewhere, but let's go into the countryside, you know, country house, exactly as you say, walk in the forest, put phones and computers away. And there's something that reconnecting with nature, being in nature, the kind of naturalness of it, the slowness of it, the quiet and, you know, or natural sounds does seem to help us also come back to ourselves. And I notice in group facilitation, and I've talked with colleagues who are also noticing this, that you sort of see bigger impact in groups when you bring them into nature, and especially get them off their phones and their laptops. But, you know, the kind of brain aspect of that, you know, also with your point is that, and this is, I'm sure you work with this as well, because we talk about it a lot with mindfulness practices, but a lot of what we're doing in a mindfulness practice is down regulating the default mode network in the brain, or we sometimes call it the narrative network, which is the blah, blah, blah of your mind, the constant chatter, which you know in your work even more than I do, a lot of our stress and anxiety comes from this narrative, comes from the thoughts and the conversations and commentary of ourselves, right, that we have in our heads. And, you know, so we down regulate that by connecting more with our direct experience network. And I always tell people when they're learning meditation, any moment in your life that you want to turn down the volume of this narrative because you want to be present or you want to be relaxed, this is part of the skill of relaxation, you activate the direct experience network. And what that means is you bring your attention to your senses. You come back to your senses. We even have an expression in English, come back to your senses. I don't know if you have something like that in Portuguese. Coming back to your senses is like being sane, essentially.
Yeah. We say something, it's quite interesting. We say falling into the real, cair na real. Yeah.
Falling into the real.
The real, yeah. It's an adjective, real,
Yes.
but then we turn it into a noun and we put an article in front of it.
Oh,
so
beautiful.
Falling, kind of falling awake, like John Kabat-Zinn plays a lot. He says,
yes,
don't fall asleep, you fall awake. We in Portuguese say fall in the real, kind of come back to your senses. Yeah.